Yes, so we're back on our trapper as of this evening. Decided just to carry on playing. Did experiment with my occultist. Come to that in a second. But yes, I just made a little bit more progress. It's really so slow, this league. Unlocked a couple of favourite maps, ran a couple of guardians. Fairly straightforward, to be honest. Our DPS is not great still. No real improvements have been made to the build, other than I noticed that I'm extremely dumb. I was running Nycta's Lantern, which I've had for ages, in my offhand with this alternating scepter in my main hand, and I actually read the alt text for Battle Mage, which says gain added spell damage equal to the damage of your main hand weapon, which is of course the only reason I'm using it, because it has extra fire damage as an attack mod, and that's what I'm trying to add to my spells, because otherwise, if you ignore the actual damage of the weapon, it's just a 30% elemental damage scepter. So using that in your offhand is dumb, and you can actually see this on the tooltip. 38k DPS at the moment. Obviously it's several million, but tooltip says 38k. Swap them over, 31.7k. So yeah, probably a good idea to get that extra 17% damage. Which is what it works out at. So that was dumb. How will we fix that now? By swapping our weapons over. Just found my first All Flame of Manifested Wealth. So I just pulled a bunch of chaos out of strong boxes, so I'm not completely broke now again, which is nice. Got about 180 C out of that and 4 exalts. Not a lot, but I'm not particularly geared up for strong boxes on the passive tree, and I just use whatever scarabs I had handy, and so that was fine. So we'll carry on with the trapper for a bit. I might re-roll again. Who knows? Who knows? We've rolled 4 builds. But yeah, I did enjoy the experiment with my occultist, and it was an unholy experiment. It was nice to do it. It was interesting to experiment with different recovery mechanics. And I did learn a few things. So, but I don't think this is viable for the kind of content I want to play in the way that I like to play, ultimately, which is a bit of a shame. I did turn on my MTX from last league with this ridiculous hat temporarily, which is why my life bar is purple. But yeah, so, I mean, Dark Pact. The idea of this build was Dark Pact, and Dark Pact sacrifices your life to do damage. So it does a nice big AoE, and we're running it with Spell Echo, which is why it casts multiple times. If we don't do that, it just casts once. We're running it with Sacrifice, which causes it to sacrifice more life to do damage. If you take that out, it does less damage, but uses less life. We're running Wrath Pith, which is increasing our crit and spell damage, but also sacrifices more life. So we're pretty much sacrificing, 40% of our life or something when we actually cast it. I did change the spec of this slightly. I don't know why everyone doing this build isn't running increased energy shield recharge rate. Because what I noticed is that, I mean, the build that I was aiming towards, I was just looking at people on PoB Ninja in the end. I had the idea, realised people are doing it, may as well be inspired by a sorted PoE Ninja build. So I was looking on there, and there are people with a setup for like 12 million DPS, which is decidedly average, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's better than a number of my builds, nowhere near as good as my build last league, or a few leagues before that. But yeah, 12 million DPS is very respectable. It's not really Uber territory for me, Uber boss killing, because that would require skill if I had that much DPS, but it's more than comfortable to take out Maven and so forth, and Uber Elder without even trying. 8 mil is fine for them, to be honest. More than fine. 5, 6 mil, fine. Anyway, Yeah, so they're quoting like 12 million DPS, and that's what POB says. However, if you actually hold down the button, which is what we're talking about for damage per second, this happens. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so we're bottoming out after about 3 seconds. If you're bottoming out and you don't have 40% of your life to spend, you're only going to sacrifice a tiny fraction of the life it wants to sacrifice. Let's say best case it's about half. Which means that half of your DPS kind of goes out the window after a few seconds, which is why I spec'd into this increased ES recharge, because if I take that out, that's like 1.5 seconds, and we're completely bottomed out. We have no recovery. These are the builds that people are actually running. I mean, this whole setup is not finished, so, you know, but that's the kind of recovery rate we're talking about, and that's the amount of life they're sacrificing, because it's percentage-based. They would have a lot more life than this, it would do more damage. But let's say this were 12 million DPS. I get 12 million DPS for a second and a freaking half, and then it's gone. So, yeah, which means it's kind of burst. So it's like 12 million DPS for a second. So do 12 million DPS, and then you have to stop. Now, as it happens, that's pretty much the story with Petrified Blood as well, because, yeah, the Petrified... not Petrified Blood, the mechanic from Dissolution of the Flesh, wherever the hell that is. It's in here somewhere. I must have a socket here somewhere. Yeah, Dissolution of the Flesh. So this widget that is reserving your life as you take damage, and it gradually reserves your life down and down until you stop taking damage for 2 seconds. And then after 2 seconds of taking no damage, everything goes away. So you compare that to something like Dark Pact. Dark Pact, which is sacrificing the life that you actually have. There's several things I want to say here. So, yeah, first of all, that Dissolution just doesn't work playstyle-wise for me, because it relies on you being in a situation where you are going to have 2 seconds where you don't take any damage. That's no dots. If one monster hits you for 1 point of damage, and you actually take 1 point every 1 second, your Dissolution will never recover, and the next thing that hits you may reserve all your life and kill you. So you actually have to have these blank periods, so that means that all sorts of content is out. And I kind of fancied for Endgame Atlas running Breach, and, you know, Breach, I like Breach. It's entertaining, and there's more scarabs this league. I thought, why not? Let's try Breach. And yeah, sorted. But the point is, that is not content which gives you a 2 second break. You know, you're standing in the middle of a breach. You are surrounded by monsters. Go Steve. So that's a bit of a problem. I'm not sure Legion would be much better. Blight would be fine, because everything is fine with Blight. Just any build at all. It doesn't even have to do damage if you're doing blighted maps. And you've got 2 ring enchants. Ultimatum would be terrible. Ultimatum is terrible anyway, but it would be terrible. Expedition, I think it would be this sort of style would be good for. You know, the style would be good for, because it's just bursts, monsters pop up out of the ground, you murder them, hopefully there's a brief delay. If you've got 12 million DPS, so you do 12 million damage, you kill everything, and the next one pops. And hopefully that's 2 seconds later. It probably isn't, but you've got a reasonable chance. But things like Breach are out, really dense maps are out, Delirium would be out, Simulacrums would be out, and yeah, I kind of like all that stuff. The map device has shut down. So, yeah, that's the problem. So Dissolution's kind of an issue for that point of view. And it's also an issue in that it is... while you're taking damage, reducing the life that you have, which reduces the life that you have to cast. You know, to actually get maximum damage, you need to be able to spend the life. And if most of your life is gone to reservation, you can't spend it. So, not great from that point of view either. But yeah, I don't know why people aren't running ES Recharge, because that just increases the time that you have to effectively do DPS. But if you're only DPSing, you've maybe got a second out of every 4 seconds there or something where you can't DPS because you don't have the necessaries. That's assuming you've actually done the spec that I've just done, which other people aren't. Your damage is actually only 3/4 of what it should be. If every 10 seconds you're spending 2 seconds running away from the monsters so you can actually get life back, well, your DPS is it's only like 80%. So you're talking 80% of 3/4, and yeah, you're starting to get down to about sort of 50-60% damage. And if your spec is, I mean, say you're supposed to do 20 million damage, you may be talking like 10. Yeah, it's not that great. There are a lot of builds that can do that. Plus you have the hassle of dealing with the reservation. And whilst the mechanic sounds cool, the way I had it set up before, which I just switched away from here, you're effectively getting rid of all of your mana because you're running blood magic to give you more life, and you're throwing away aura reservation, and so now you cast, and life is both your mana and your life. That's what your life is. But then you add Dissolution, which turns your reservation of life into your life, and your life into your mana, because you're casting with life, but then you're reserving it. So effectively you've still got life and mana, it's just that it's more complicated, and it has this ridiculous recovery mechanic. Because there is no recovery. There's no regen, there's no leech, there's no recoup, because that will not change the reservation from Dissolution. The only thing that works is waiting 2 seconds. So if you're doing nice, fairly empty T16s, that would be fine, because you clear a pack, you go to the next pack, hopefully, 2 seconds have passed without you doing too much damage. Maybe you wiped out the last pack before they got a shot off. Yeah, so, and that would be fine, but you want to do dense content? And I mean, bosses, I think that bosses like Maven would be a nightmare on this build, because there's huge amounts of degen, and there's particles all over the place, and you don't have any recovery at all. You need to find 2 seconds when nothing is hitting you, and the arena is filled with particles. Uber Elder, likewise. Elden Shaper in the same map, and they're constantly casting shit at you, and there's degen on the floor. And, there's stuff throwing little projectiles. That would be a nightmare. Exarch and Eater, I think, would be fine, as long as they're not Ubers. But kind of already done them. They're the tutorial bosses. Ubers, generally, I just don't see it working. T17s, by all accounts, I don't see it working. And the damage is kind of, it could be on the good side, but it's burst, and it's not what it says on the tin. It's very brief. So, interesting experiment is the long and short of it. Kind of enjoyed playing it. But yeah, and I tried sort of rescuing it slightly, so I switched over to, I dropped blood magic, because it's only really adding 10% more life. I dropped it, which gave me mana back, which meant that I could reserve my mana, and I kept some mana free. I was running an Eternal Blessing with my curse on it, so I always had a Despair Aura for Chaos Pops. I switched that back to a Divine Blessing, so that I have to cast it, which means I have to keep a load of mana not reserved. So I deviated and actually bought some reservation efficiency, so I can have multiple auras, and I'm just running determination and clarity, and that's about it really. Could really be running precision, arguably. That would be perfectly reasonable. I tried running petrified blood as well. You know, that gets kind of interesting. Petrified blood makes it so you can only actually regenerate your life up to halfway, but it gives you a buffer zone, so a bunch of the damage effectively gets turned into damage over time, so you take less of an initial hit and then you kind of bleed down slowly, and in theory that's supposed to work well with Dissolution because Dissolution will turn into Reservation over time. Anyway, yeah, it's in theory that's supposed to work. I didn't find it made much difference, honestly. So yeah, cool story, bro. Don't think this build is really going anywhere. I think I'm going to file it in the same category as more of Mischief and Arakali's Fang and other somewhat suboptimal, slightly vexing, unusual mechanics. It's a bit of a shame because I like interesting mechanics. I like things that are a little bit different, but I also like things that aren't clunky as fuck. Call me picky. Yeah, so we're back on the Fire Trapper, in other words. For now. I'm not going back to the minion build. I don't have the fingers for DD right now. I could re-roll again. It's half tempting to roll into just like a EA Ballista Elementalist or something, you know, just standard, something straightforward that scales really easily. I still don't like the scaling on this build, but the damage, and I can't decide how good the damage is. The POB, the various stuff in the POB from Fearless Dumbo, who has kindly provided a really good build guide and etc, etc. The way he is calculating it, I'm sure is correct, but if I follow the same principles, that seems to suggest my damage is a lot higher than I think it is, but it's very hard to tell because this league is so rippy. So I don't know whether I've got 1 million damage, 5 million damage. Sure as hell doesn't feel like 5 million damage, but it does feel like more than 1 million, especially now I've got the scepters the right way around. LOL. Yeah, anyway, that's quite enough of that. Yeah, gonna knock it on the head, and we shall play something tomorrow. Till next time, farewell.